Learner-centered instruction is an approach that puts the student's needs at the forefront of teaching. Unlike traditional teacher-centered instruction, this approach is based on the teacher learning how students feel about the class and adjusting their instruction based on that feedback. A class that's based on a learner-centered education focuses on creating a safe environment for students, taking into account how students prefer to learn, and differentiating instruction for individual students. The classes we observed at the York University English Language Institute included many instances of learner-centered instruction, and there were some common similarities we noticed.
An interesting warm-up that I saw was Two Truths and One Lie. This activity taps into the personal lives and interests of students, and they could share their stories to their peers. Students were also asked to teach the rules of the games to others using their first language.
It was quite interesting to see the amount of times these types of warm-ups would take just at the beginning of the class. I can see I now understand the importance of it and how it helps the teacher build a more meaningful relationship with their students. In using this activity, it gave my mentor the opportunity to connect with her students, but also gave her students the chance to connect with their peers. I observed a lot of students becoming more comfortable with the professor, as well as other students of different cultures. As these warm-ups progressed throughout the term, students would go from responding with, "I stayed home and rested," to "I went out with my friends," and I noticed them creating their own little social circles. This made the class very student-led, as students were able to share their experiences with their peers through various group discussions.
I was confused at first because of how much time my mentor teacher would spend taking attendance. I was like, why doesn't she just give out a piece of paper during class instead of asking every student an individualized question? But then I realized how valuable it was in getting to know each student. Like, just from hearing how they responded to questions, you could pick up on what their personalities are, what topics they're interested in, like even how they're feeling that day. And I saw this used to great effect in the questions being asked, because every morning they became more and more personal and individualized. And I think that builds trust between the student and the teacher. So I found that the class that I observed to be like a master class in learner-centered instruction, because course topics were scaffolded multiple classes in advance, allowing students to pick up on more difficult concepts really quick. And I think that helped when almost every activity was student-directed. Like whether it be partner discussions about vocabulary, like small groups creating mood boards, or entire class analyses of Calvin and Hobbes, the students really directed the flow.
So in my practicum, so much emphasis was put on the interactive learning and equal teacher-student relationship. Students were expected to benefit their peers and the teacher with their contributions in a shared space.
It's equal contribution.
Right.
So if I'm ready to teach you and contribute through different strategies and approach and all of that, your responsibility is also to contribute in a way that not only benefits you, but also your peers and also your teacher.
Right.
So for me, that's paramount. I think that's very important, that they realize that it's not a one-way process here.
Yeah.
They realize that it's a give and take in my classroom.
Another thing was the sitting. Students were put into different groups, so they wouldn't just be talking with their friends who might distract the class. And they had the opportunity to collaborate with others who have different personalities and language learning experience.
Well, in Lindsey's class, I noticed there were a lot of opportunities where students were able to participate and communicate amongst each other. In my observation with Lindsey, I saw a lot of examples of student-centered learning, and Lindsey emphasized how these warm-ups not only helped practice the students' speaking skills, but also how these warm-ups helped her monitor their mental well-being.
What I try to do is that first week and 2 weeks, as I'm building that, as I'm getting the class to gel with each other, I'm speaking to them and asking them questions, trying to engage with them and practice their speaking fluency, pronunciation, all of that, but also trying to monitor their well-being.
In my opinion, warm-ups are more than just an introduction, but rather a way to set the tone for the lesson and get students actively involved in the start of the class. Not only are the students able to practice their language skills, but it also gives them ownership over their learning through shared experiences. As her class was mostly on Zoom, I felt like Lindsey did an amazing job at navigating the virtual classroom, ensuring that students were still able to effectively communicate with each other and were able to understand the concepts being taught.
My favorite activity, hands down, was the metaphors activity. Because earlier in the week, students had periodically been shown examples of metaphors interspersed among other course content. And this was actually scaffolding for a lead-in lecture on metaphors before the activity. So during the activity, the students had to write their own metaphors. And the cool thing was that they then grouped themselves based on their metaphors, not the teacher grouping them. And this forced students to not only interact with one another, but also to move around, be active, as they all tried to find similarities in the metaphors they created.
One activity that I found to be the most fun and was student-led is when the students were asked to do presentations on a topic regarding economics. The students were instructed to prepare a presentation for the class on a topic and had to include a section for discussion at the end of the class. It was almost similar to a micro-teaching activity, and these presentations sparked conversation amongst the classmates, as well as acted as a way to see if the students are understanding the concepts being presented. During these presentations, students basically took over the role of the teacher and taught the class more about the concept, as well as aided in getting students to become more engaged and involved in a conversation on the topic being discussed amongst one another.
Yeah, so one activity I saw was a group revision after listening practice about critical questions. Students were put into groups and instructed to ask each other questions about the key points mentioned in a video and check each other's understanding of critical questions. And they also used their own interpretation and examples to explain the concepts of critical questions to their peers. So this activity focused on student interaction and co-construction of knowledge.
A learner-centered approach can transform the traditional top-down teacher-centered teaching into a more interactive, productive language learning experience. This approach can also maximize student talking time and contribution to class, so students can have a greater opportunity to use and practice the target language in various contexts. Another advantage to learner-centered education is that it helps students build the confidence to communicate more effectively while also helping them develop meaningful connections with their peers. We found that this allowed for students to be more involved in the learning process, and through giving students ownership over their learning, the skills they learn will help them both inside and outside the classroom.